Welcome to the PATH training module. This is for the Project for Assistance in Transition from Homelessness. In this course, we'll be reviewing the PATH workflow and how to enter data into HMIS. You should have taken the HMIS introductory training, as well as a case management training prior to this, as information in those trainings will be relevant to the PATH workflow. First, we'll review some information about the PATH program, then we'll jump into Service Point and look at the way we enter client data into HMIS itself. So to start, we have a number of supported activities for PATH. These include outreach, rehabilitation, community health, mental health, substance use disorder treatment, and more. But we clearly see that PATH covers a broad spectrum of services for clients, and PATH programs are dedicated to work with clients who are experiencing mental health disorders. Here's a number of definition of terms. Many of these you'll have seen before from the HMIS introductory series, such as Project Start, Project Exit, and so forth. But I'll review a couple of these real briefly, as they might be a little different for PATH workflows. The Project Start is the date of the first interaction between the PATH worker and the client. The engagement date is when a client agrees to participate in a deliberate client assessment or the start of a case plan. So this is a one-time event, and this is a date that you will mark in the PATH workflow. Enrollment is a PATH-specific term in this context of HMIS. Enrollment is when it is determined whether or not an individual meets the criteria to be enrolled in the PATH program and receive PATH services. For a long time, you'd be working with a client, and you may not be certain whether they're PATH eligible or eligible for those PATH services. The enrollment date is the date you would indicate whether they were eligible or not. The project exit date is when the client is no longer involved with the PATH program. There's a few different reasons that might be, but we'll cover that later. Re-engagement is when you reestablish contact with a PATH enrolled client. You may be working with a client consistently, and then they fall off the radar for a few weeks or a couple of months. Re-engagement is a service where you're able to reconnect with that client and engage them in the program and those services once again. And then in PATH programs, we also have referrals and services. And these are specific services and referrals recorded for PATH programs. And these are only recorded after a client has been enrolled in the PATH program itself, which we'll discuss in the workflow. I would recommend taking the case management training to look at the referral and service workflows in more detail. There is some data that is needed prior to the date of engagement. This would be the name. It could be an alias if necessary, the project start date, the current living situation. You should always record where you're meeting a client in the PATH workflow, and a disabling condition, and the client must have one to be eligible for the PATH project for the initial workflow. If it turns out later the client doesn't have a disabling condition or doesn't meet the criteria of having a mental health disorder, they would then be exited from the PATH program. It's also really important to identify the primary place of residence per project type. So the current living situation will be the contact. You'll record the contact with the client each time you meet them. Now, there are two components to the PATH program. There's street outreach and supportive services. Whether you enroll the client in one or the other, it depends on where that client is being contacted. If a client is living in a place not meant for habitation, they'll be enrolled in a street outreach component of PATH. If a client is being contacted at an emergency shelter or a safe haven, they would be enrolled in the supportive services only component of the PATH program. Now here we have a data collection workflow, and this workflow is designed to support the interactions and development of relationships with clients over time. And it's just a general flow to show what is supposed to happen with the client. So we have on the left-hand side the project start, when you first interact with the client and meet them. Then we have engagement. This is the process of getting the client to agree to a case management plan. The enrollment is specific to PATH programs only and not other street outreach programs. But for PATH programs, enrollment is when it's determined whether or not a client is eligible for PATH services and then can receive those services. And the project exit is when the client leaves the PATH program. There's a number of different reasons, as you can see listed here: housing, transition to a different source or a different resource, the client leaves the program, or the client simply is no longer able to be contacted after a set amount of time. Here on the right-hand side, you can see all the data elements are required for PATH programs. You can take a closer look at these, but generally we consider these to be the UDEs and PDEs, which are covered in the HMIS introductory training. And the PATH-specific services we'll cover in more detail in our HMIS workflow training. These are some more additional information. So this gives an idea of when information should be collected. So we have at project start, by date of engagement, date of enrollment, and project exit. As you can see with a PATH program, you're not required to collect all the information prior to the date of engagement. There's an understanding that a client may not be willing to work with you, may not be able to provide information, and it's hard to get that information when a client's not ready to go ahead and engage in services. So the expectation is that at project start, you may not be able to complete all these fields, but at the date of engagement, when a client does agree to participate in a case management plan, then all this information does have to be completed on the top portion. On the bottom portion for the Federal Partner Program data elements, P1, P2, P3, and P4, that information will have to be completed at date of enrollment and thereafter, with the exception of connection with the SOAR, which should be collected at project start where possible. The current living situation is a location where we can record where the client is staying or is currently residing when you make a contact with them. This should be recorded anytime you have a contact with the client. There are a series of required questions that must be completed on the sub-assessment, but for PATH programs, that requirement is a little bit less than some other programs, which we'll review when we're in HMIS going through the workflow. Now remember, contacts that require collection of this data includes activities such as even a conversation between a street outreach worker and the client about the client's well-being or needs, a visit to the office discussing a housing referral plan, or even referrals in some situations. And just as a broad note, we'll be using different terms throughout the training. When we use program, we're referring to the federal funding source. So PATH program means the broad program that says PATH works with individuals who have mental health disorders, whereas a project refers to specific components in HMIS. So you may have a PATH project. We discussed earlier there's a street outreach portion and a supportive services only portion. Those are different projects that are components of the entire PATH program. So now we'll go ahead and jump into Service Point Training the Service Point training site, and we'll review the workflow for entering clients in PATH, updating the information, and eventually exiting the clients as well. So here we are in Service Point, and this is where we'll go ahead and take a look at exactly how we'd enter a client into PATH in HMIS. So the first important thing is to make sure that we use our correct enter data as. This will be different for every user and every agency, but we have a PATH training program set up. We'll just go and pull that up here. So we see there's two different versions. There's SO for street outreach and a supportive services for clients who may be in shelter or a safe haven. In this case, we'll say our client is currently engaged in a street outreach program where they're currently residing in a place not meant for habitation. So we'll go and select that EDA. And we'll search for clients. If you have any questions about the workflow for entering clients or searching for clients, I would recommend using the HMIS introductory training. In this case, we have a pre-made client called PATH Training Video. Very creative. And we'll pull up that client. So you may or may not see a summary and client profile tab. This information can or cannot be useful depending on your particular agency. These are customizable per agency, so what you see is a little different depending on where you're working. We'll jump to the Households tab. This is also covered in the HMIS introductory training. In this scenario, we'll say the client has no other household members with them and they're presenting alone, so we'll just leave this tab as being. We'll jump to the ROI tab. So this tab will be really important to go ahead and ensure that we're recording information. This is particularly important on the balance of state side because this does affect visibility and the ability to share data throughout the community with other providers and so forth. So for balance of state, this is absolutely critical to complete For Maricopa, we strongly recommend completing this, but there's not a mechanism to prevent data sharing if this isn't completed on the Maricopa side. So we'll go ahead and add our release information here. We'll do the release granted is yes. We'll do the date that the project will start. In this case, it's going to be October 1st. And for balance of state, that ROI will be good for about a year. So we'll just go ahead and use that in this scenario. And we'll use the correct date. We'll select documentation and the witness and all complete. So that's done. You can also upload documents, including the ROI, which can be very helpful in a lot of situations. You can upload a document here on the ROI tab. Some agencies prefer to go to the client profile tab and upload documents as well. I would refer to your individual agency policy on where to upload documents. There's not a standard set by the HMIS team or the continuums, so please refer to your agency for best practices there. So now we'll jump to the entry exit tab, and we see the client has been enrolled in a core entry program previously, but we're saying we're meeting the client on the 1st of October, and we'll go and add that entry exit. Now we'll want to make sure that our type is path, since it's a path program, and we'll update our product start date to 10/1/2023. And we'll first go through the UDE assessment. So in a path program, before a client is engaged, and the client has not been engaged yet, we're not required to complete all this information. We have a lot of data not collected, and that's perfectly fine given the situation. It is important for a client, if they have a disabling condition, to be indicated as a yes, since this is sort of a prerequisite to being involved in the path program. And we'll say the client wasn't willing to engage with us for these questions down here, and we'll just leave those be for now. Once you complete the UDE assessment, all the information that you're able to complete, we'll jump to the path entry assessment. And the first top one is going to be the current living situation. So this is recording where you're meeting the client or the type of living situation they're in. To record this, we'll click Add. Give a start date. We'll make the date of contact match the start date or the actual date you contacted the client. For the current living situation, if they're in a street outreach program, will generally be a place not meant for habitation. If it's a SSO or a supportive services only, it would be a shelter or a safe haven. Location details you can enter. And then the other thing we ask to enter is the latitude and longitude, which just helps understand where clients are in the area, helps understand exactly where clients are moving to, and just helps us understand exactly the homelessness in the region better. So we'll just enter that data here. Now this may not be a field that you would see on the balance of state side, but a field that we would see on the Maricopa side. So we'll just enter that data. And then the cross streets can always be helpful as well. Okay. Perfect. And then we'll save that. Everything below here isn't required for path programs. So we'll skip these parts here. And this particular current living situation doesn't meet the criteria below anyways. So we'll save that. Now, a lot of PDs were covered in the HMIS introductory training. So we'll just kind of go through these. And we'll go ahead and say the client, once again, was not willing to engage with us about income. We can see that they have non-cash benefits recorded from a prior enrollment. If there's any changes, we can make those changes. Same thing with covered health by health insurance, also previously recorded. And let's say the client also is not willing to engage with us about disabilities either. That is okay at this point. If and when the client does report that they have a mental health disorder, we should make sure it's recorded the date of first contact or on the 1st of October in this scenario. I will go over that in just a few moments. We'll also say the client wasn't willing to engage with us about these questions here. And at this point, the client is not engaged because they're not willing to work with us, develop a case management plan, so we'll leave that blank as well. Now, down at the bottom, we have two sections, and this may be a different layout depending on your agency and your continuum, but the path enrollment questions, these top three questions here, are required questions for path programs. And these would be filled out when the client is determined to be eligible or not eligible for path services, which will cover more detail. The questions below, criminal justice involvement and below, are custom questions to the continuum and your agency. So you may or may not see these depending on your continuum choices as well as your agency choices. I would refer to your own agency for guidance on how to fill out these custom questions, as they are determined and sort of controlled by the agencies and how they want to interface with that data. So for the purpose of this training, we'll leave this blank. The only question that we have is whether or not the client is connected with SOAR. We'll say the client provided that information and said they were not connected with SOAR at this time. So we'll go and click Save and Exit, and that will complete our enrollment into PATH. Now, at this point, you may or may not record services and referrals as part of a standard practice. For PATH programs, they do have PATH-specific referrals and services that can be provided to clients, but these are only recorded after a client is determined to be PATH eligible for services. So if you're recording services unrelated to PATH, that are not funded by PATH, we go to the Service Transaction tab and record those services or those referrals, but these are only services or referrals that are not PATH related at this point. If you want more details on how to add service referrals, I refer to the case management training. So at this point, we'll record a couple of contacts and just sort of go through that workflow. So let's say we met the client 1 week later. We'll add an interim review. We'll say we met them, let's say on the 7th. And the first thing you would do is record the current living situation sub-assessment or the contact. Again, this is always required every time you meet with the client. So we'll again fill out the appropriate date. We'll say the same place not meant for habitation. We'll again fill out the latitude and longitude if you have that information or that field available to you. And we'll say the client was at the same location. And we'll save that. In this case, we'll go ahead and say that the client, once again, did not want to engage with us in providing any other information, whether in the PDEs or the UDEs. And if that's the case, that's totally fine. That's why we have to go ahead and build a working relationship with the client over time. At this point, we just click Save and Exit. Again, you can go ahead and record any services or referrals that are not PATH related if you so desire. So we'll go ahead and add another contact. In this case, we'll say that on the 14th of October, the client decided we have a date of engagement. The client is engaging with the case management plan. At this point, we're required to go ahead and complete all the other fields in the system. So we'll go ahead and add interim review. We'll say that we're meeting with the client on the 14th. We'll add that current living situation sub-assessment. And we'll once again fill out the appropriate fields. And we'll save that. Now, because the client has agreed to a date of engagement, which we would record all the way down here, we do have to complete all the other fields on the program data elements, as well as the UDEs. Now, the important piece here is that this information is supposed to be completed as of the client start date. So when we're filling out information that the client is providing us for the first time regarding the sub-assessments or the UDEs, we'll want to fill that out at the entry. So what we see here, if when a client reports they have a mental health disorder, user should make sure it's recorded at the date of first contact. So that would be the entry date. So for this piece, we'll just click Save and Exit. And we'll want to go back to the entry to record all the other information that we weren't able to obtain before. So we'll go ahead and update any fields here. So we'll say that the client giving us the full date of birth here. We have already this other information recorded. So they have no evictions. And then we'll fill out this information for the client prior residence. So we'll go and just fill this out, as laid out in the HMIS introductory training. So we have that. The access information can be really important for getting services. So if at all possible, definitely go ahead and obtain that information. And this could be updated throughout the process as well, the access question. So we'll save all this information, and we'll also jump to the path entry assessment. So we've already recorded other information, but we just want to make sure we update the path program data elements and the sub-assessments as of when they agree to be part of a case management plan or have a date of engagement. So the client indicated to us that they have no income. So I'll go ahead and click no here. We'll say this was verified, And the other piece is that we'll go ahead and add the disabilities here. So we'll say the client does indicate they do have a mental health disorder. And we'll go and make sure that 10/1/2023 date matches the entry date into the program itself. Okay, perfect. The client indicated they were not a survivor of domestic violence, and the engagement date was already added on an interim update. So we just wanted to fill out those required pieces at the start, and we'll leave everything else as is. Now, we can go back to the interim. We created the second one on the 14th, and we'll go ahead and see that we now have all the contacts recorded and all the information filled out here that we just completed as of their entry. Now, the path enrollment information may not be completed on the date of engagement. It may be completed at a later date, depending on whether or not it's determined the client is eligible for services. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add another interim review. On the 21st, and we'll say that we determined whether or not the client is eligible for path services. So the first thing again is to add that contact. Very critical for understanding exactly how often it takes to meet with the client, engage with the client before they're able to engage with services. This is something the PATH program is very interested in to better understand exactly what level of effort and engagement is needed to sort of help clients move into a different phase. If there's any changes to these here, income, cash benefit, and so forth, we'll go ahead and indicate that. We'll say that the client also indicated they have a physical disability as well. So let's see here. To do that, we would just go ahead and end the prior one. Required for this particular one, so we'll end it the day before we're recording our contact here. Okay. And we'll update the disability sub-assessment as appropriate. Now, on this day, on the 21st, we'll say that we were able to determine whether or not the client was eligible for PATH services. So we'll say the date they were determined as being eligible or not. We'll say the client became PATH enrolled, in this case a yes. If they were not, you would select the reason they were not enrolled. And then you would go ahead and exit the client from the program, since if they're not eligible for PATH services, they're no longer qualified to be part of the program. But in this case, we'll select yes, and we'll save and exit. Now, at this point, we are able to record services and transactions that are PATH specific or that are PATH funded. So to do that, we'll go to the Service Transactions tab, and the process is mainly like you would find in the case management training with the addition of a couple of fields. So first, we'll start with adding a service. So we'll make sure that we have the right service date. It was 10/21/2023. We'll say that we're adding a case care management service. And the real important service is the type of PATH funded service provided. So we'll say that we're doing a clinical assessment in this particular case. And you can select the service type that you feel is most appropriate to match the service down here. There isn't a specific guide that requires the service type to match the type of PATH funded service. So use the broad bucket that's most appropriate for service type, And then at the type of path funded service, use exactly the type of path funded service that was provided. Service costs, funding sources, support documentation, and so forth, that can all be completed per your agency requirements. In this case, we'll skip those pieces, and we'll say that this need is closed, and that it was fully met. So the really only difference for recording path services is the addition of that type of path-funded service provided. We'll save and exit. Now we'll go back to the dashboard because we can also add referrals for clients. And the referral process is mainly the same, but we'll go ahead and add a referral here. And we'll go and add our terms. You may have a provider quick list, but if not, you can add a provider down below. This all should be covered in the case management training as well. We select our provider. And the real difference here is the existence of two more fields, the type of path referral, as well as if any type of path referral made, select the outcome. So in this case, we'll say the type of path referral was educational services, and if any type of path referral, select the outcome. So attained means it was received, not attained means it wasn't, unknown means we're just not sure. This can be completed right now, this outcome field, if you're referring to your own agency and you absolutely 100% know the client's receiving those services, then you can go and select attained right off the bat. But we'll leave it blank for now. Let's say we're referring to an outside agency, we're just not sure exactly what's going to happen with that referral. And then we'll complete the rest of the referral as needed. We'll go and update the date, the appropriate date. So that we have the right referral date and information. And then we'll say that the need has been identified and the service is pending because we're not sure exactly what happened there. And then we'll save all. And now we have a referral as well. So the final part of the workflow will be exiting a client from Path. Now there's a number of reasons you may exit a client from Path. This can include the client no longer being out of contact for 90 days, the client was housed, moved to a different program, or simply declined services. The other possibility is they're not eligible for Path services, but we covered that earlier. In this case, that won't be the reason client's being exited because we did it saying they have been enrolled successfully in the Path program and were eligible for those services. In our situation, we'll go ahead and indicate that the client's exiting because they were able to find a housing situation with somebody. And we'll go and record an exit date. So we'll say their reason for leaving is they completed the program and their destination is staying or living with family, permanent tenure. So we'll click Save and Continue. So we'll once again want to add a current living situation sub-assessment because the exit date should be reflective of the last date that the client exited. In this case, we have the exit as 12/28/2023, which is kind of a long time between two contacts, and we'll say that we actually saw them, in this location. We'll complete the information as well. This might be a situation where you'd pick a different current living situation if they're currently housed or you meet them somewhere that's not where you've met them previously. We'll just keep it consistent for the purposes of this training. Okay, we'll save that. If there's any updates this workflow here, we'd go ahead and record those updates, any changes in their health insurance, disabilities, and so forth. And that would go ahead and exit the client from that Path program. The last piece here is that if there's any additional services or referrals provided on that last date, we would go and record those. We'll say we didn't record any services, but we did record a referral back in October, and we'll want to make sure we update the Path field specifically. So we'll go ahead and edit the referral, and we want to go back to that Path field. If any type of Path referral made, select the outcome. At this point, let's say we know that referral, those services were attained, we'll go ahead and save and exit. And now we see that we've completed all the fields for the referrals, and the client is currently exited from the program. So that concludes the training for PATH programs. Thank you for sitting with me and watching that there. Again, the HMIS Introductory and Case Management trainings are excellent resources for understanding some of the nuances, especially with referrals and services. Thank you for your time and have a good day.